Hey folks, it's Ken Puls and the Data Monkey back again. And in my last video, I showed how the world's going to be changing with some cool new changes for auto refresh for pivot tables. But one of the comments that I made in that video is that the fact that you can get into a spill error state and not necessarily know about it because you don't get a warning means that it's a good time to revisit things like error checking. So what I want to do in this video is show you a method for setting up an error checking framework in your workbooks so that you won't get caught off guard by a spill error blowing up some of the stuff in your workbook. Now, the thing I want you to know about this is that you can use this for your classic pivot tables today. You can use this for all kinds of other things as well. Some of the examples I'm going to work with here are going to be a little bit contrived just to show you what it's going to look like. I'll call those out as we go through. But the important part here is it's a good solid framework that you can implement into your own workbooks today in order to make sure that you don't get caught out with any predictable errors along the way. So what we can see here, we've got our table of data, we've got our pivot table and a chart, and you'll notice that my salespeople are filtered down right now to just a couple. I'm actually going to unfilter this at the moment, and you're going to see that my pivot table gets into a spill error state. Now, why that is? Well, turns out there's a cell right here that's blank, so it's blocking the data, but that's actually not the point of this. The point is we've obviously gone into a spill state, our chart has zeroed out on us, and this is something that if maybe our data was in another worksheet, we wouldn't have seen this, so we want to be able to make this obvious. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to press Control Z to undo that. We'll get back into a good state here, and I want to talk a little bit about the error handling framework that I've actually got in place here. So you'll notice that it is up the top here. Okay, it's this range. And we're going to start right in the top left-hand cell. We've got our error checks listed here, but you'll also notice that this is a named range. So I just came up, selected the cell in here and typed in RNG home _ sheet 1. Now, what that's about, well, it's going to come into play later. But for right now, every worksheet that I'm working with where I'm putting this in place, I'm going to give it a unique name in place that way. You'll also notice that I've got a control, a target, and a state that I've listed up the top here. So these are just some helpful column headers to keep me informed as to what I'm actually doing. I've got a line for global. We're going to have a global error checker that looks at all of our worksheets in the workbook to make sure that we know if anything has gone sideways. And then we've got our worksheet level errors here. And you'll notice that I'm trying to pick up, in this case here, 2 of them. You might have 1, you might have 40 different error checks, and they don't all have to be related to pivot tables. In fact, none of them do. But in this case, I'm trying to figure out, is my pivot in an error state, or is all of the data included in the pivot table? There is a worksheet status here. This is just a simple formula that goes and sums all the worksheet items, allows me to insert new rows at any time. And then there is another all checks passed, which is a slightly larger range in this one here. This is going to go back and sum everything here as well. And you think, wow, summing all of it, Ken? Really? Like even the precedents and whatnot of your previous one? Yeah, it works because in order to have a nice clean worksheet, I want the sum of all of these things to be 0. Anything other than that is a problem. Okay, so that's the logic that we're looking at. So let's start first off with, is the pivot in an error state? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to write a nice little formula here. We're going to say is error. And we're going to check our pivot table. So we can go and we can hit OK on that, and it says false. All right. What happens if we clear the slicer? We get our spill error, chart blanks out, and we now have true. Excellent. Only problem is you'll notice that my formula is not picking up the change here, and this one definitely should be picking something up in this case. So what we need to do is we need to convert our true and false values into numbers. And the easiest way to do that is to come here right after the equals and just type in minus minus. And what this will do is it will make true become 1. And if we go back and filter these ones down here, it makes a false value become 0. Now, that's handy because I can now use this in order to set up some cool new rules here. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to grab all these cells and go to conditional formatting. I'm going to put an icon set on this, and I'm going to use my little green check mark in this particular case. I am going to need to customize this though. So we're going to manage rules. We go to my icon set and say edit rule. And inside this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to show the icon only. That's all I really care about here. And when we're going to switch these out to be numbers, and we're going to make this one greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, we're going to show a red X. If it's less than or equal to 0 and greater than or equal to 0, in other words, is it 0, we're going to show a green check mark. And if it's less than 0, we're going to end up getting a red X here. So when we go and say OK, and we apply that, you'll see it blanks out the numbers. We don't actually need to see those. We just want our check marks. And I'm also going to center that so that everything looks okay. So at this point, I clear this out, we get some red X's. If I go back and filter down to just these two, everything gives us green check marks. So everything looks good there. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to change this up just a little bit. So let me clear this. Let's go find our spill error. We'll delete that so that everything filters out nicely. Now, here's the deal of what I'm trying to do in this case. You would not do this if you have slicers linked to your pivot table. What I'm trying to look at right now is, has all of my data in my sales actually been reported in my pivot tables? This is not something I would use with a slicer unless I were to try and build a more comprehensive check that was checking what the values were in the slicer and using a filter to summarize these correctly. So pretend the slicers don't exist anymore. And the main purpose is, did we get all of our values in the pivot table? In order to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to go back to my pivot table analyze here, and I'm going to turn off the auto refresh right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove a couple of rows from the table so they're value errors. So what we now know is inside the table, the total values that we have here is actually 74,586.43, but my pivot table is showing something different. So this actually indicates to me that my pivot table has not updated. It's not in an error state, that's fine, but it hasn't updated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these control and target. And this is where this becomes a useful technique for looking at virtually anything else, because I can now go and say, let's take the sum of my sales column. So my control, what I'm looking for, my source, 74,586.43. What is the target? Well, the target in this particular case is my pivot table, 85,000. Now, obviously, those two things are not the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to write in a little test in here to say, if this one does not equal this one here, enter. That is, of course, true, but notice that this isn't helping me with my error check here. So what I need to do is I need to come back into this formula, and I'm going to need to say minus minus, but I'm going to have to wrap that calculation in parentheses so the entire thing gets executed. At that point, we now get a true. You'll notice that this one is an error, therefore the worksheet status is an error, therefore worksheet errors are present throughout the entire thing, so it cascades all the way down. Of course, if we now go and say, hey, right-click and refresh the pivot table, everything comes back into state. So you can use this on your pivot tables today, even if you don't have auto refresh. On the other hand, let's see what happens if we add new data. So we'll just expand that table. Everything's out of sync again. That's not cool. If I come back in, I'm going to turn the auto refresh back on. Boom, everything looks nice here. Now, of course, again, remember, this isn't going to work if I filter down to something like Bilbo, because it now says, hey, look, you've got a whole bunch of data here. It doesn't match. So if we wanted to make that target check work or make our control check work, we need to use a more complicated formula that's reading our values from our slicer and actually filtering things down correctly. So be careful with how you use it. Obviously, we want to get something that's set up and makes sense. But the nice thing here is, again, by using a control and target, you can now check, what is my table of values over here? Do my XLOOKUP formulas return the right values or things like that? So it's much more robust than just pivot tables, but it can be used for matching your pivot table source data to your values as well. Maybe you even set up a separate pivot table that's not filterable just to make sure that the pivot cache is up to date. All right, now, where does this stuff become even more useful? Well, now what we can do is we can actually go and we can highlight this entire row, and we can say, let's put in a conditional format, new rule. What we're going to do is we're going to check whether or not this cell here does not equal 0. If it doesn't equal 0, that's a bad thing. So let's go and say format. And what we'll do is we're going to make this pretty obvious. We're going to put in a dark red fill. We're going to put in a bold font that is white, and we'll say OK. And we'll say OK again. So now, remember, I can trigger this right now just by using one of these filters. So if I go and filter it, boom, it goes in and it gives us a red bar across the top. You'll also notice that I do have an if statement in here, which is checking this value. There are errors present. Okay, so we've got at least one. If we go and clear this out, the red goes away, all error checks have passed. Now, obviously, I don't want to look at this all on a regular basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all this. We're going to go over to our data tab for this one. Yes, we are. We're going to go group and group it. And this now allows me to collapse this down so that it's kind of just out of the way for right now. But when I do go and trigger an error, it shows up. So that's great. But there's one more step here, because what if I'm putting data into my table on another worksheet and it actually goes and blows this thing out? I need to know that this is running through the entire workbook so I can see what's going on. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to open this up again for a second here. You'll notice that I did have a global check involved in this as well, but I haven't implemented that. So if I go back to my TOC, or table of content worksheets, you'll notice that I have some links for my individual worksheets here. This one doesn't have an error check yet. So I'm going to go and say equals, and I'm going to pick up the worksheet status errors from this, not the global, okay? And there's a reason why. We don't want a circular reference here. If I bring this across, this now gives me a nice clean error check in this case, as does sheet 2. Here is my global error checks. This one is actually summing the cells above again, and I'm going to feed this back in over here. So we're going to say equals. We'll grab our global error checks. So because these guys are feeding into another table that acts as precedence of this global, we're not actually linking to this cell at all, so we don't get into a circular reference state. What's really cool about this now, I can actually close this one down. Let's say I go over to sheet 2. Sheet 2 also has some error checks on it, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to change something right now, and I'm going to blow something up, okay? This is now blown up. If I go back to sheet 1, we can see that there's an error present. If I go and click on this, we can see that it's actually in the global state. So I don't really have to worry about it in this worksheet. This worksheet's fine. The error is not here. What that means is I can now go back to the TOC and I can see that my error is actually in sheet 2. So now I've got some good checks that are built into this to know exactly where my error is actually showing up. There's one more trick to this whole thing here, and that is when we go and take a look at the formula that I've used here. Unfortunately, with the hyperlink, you can't just put in the named range itself. If you do this and you click on it, it actually takes you to a web browser, which is really frustrating. You have to have the hash mark in front of it, which means we got to treat this as text. So you might be able to get around this with some indirect functions or something like that. But the reality on this one here right now is by encoding it so that we have hash range home 2, I can now go and say, let's go see what's going on this worksheet. Oh, there's an error here. I can fix it in the source data, of course. That's going to bring everything back nice to the way it should be. I can now go back to my TOC. Everything looks good here. And on sheet 1, everything looks good. So if I go and filter this, blow things up, sheet 2 knows there's an error in the model. It knows that it's in the global. If I were to go back, of course, to my TOC, it tells me exactly which worksheet has the problem. So I can go straight there and try and figure out what is going wrong. The more error checks you have in this, obviously, the more granular you can get with your data. You can put as many as you want in this. And I've used lots of these in some models where there's all kinds of intricacies there. It's a great approach for being able to go back and actually watch these things. Now, the last thing I want to say on this one, really encourage you to start thinking about these things because again, this spill state inside your pivot tables is a silent error that doesn't really throw anything that you would necessarily know. So it's really easy when you're working on sheet 1 updating data to cause issues in sheets 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This will at least allow you to know right away if you've got your error check at the top of it, boom, something went sideways. I better go and find out what it is. So hopefully you'll find that to be a useful technique. We'll see you next time.